Hey everyone, welcome to the channel. My name is Ben, and if you're new here, I'm a meditation and spiritual teacher, and on the channel I share interesting insights and tips and tricks and guidance on meditation and spiritual topics, generally for obviously for meditators, but also for people who are seekers of the divine, seekers of truth. I try to help and guide as best I can, and the information that I share is based on the fact that I was taught meditation by my dad when I was 6 years old. So I've been really fortunate in my upbringing and have been surrounded by many amazing teachers, not just my dad, but also a divine master, an avatar. And so I feel just called to share more and more, and that's the purpose of this channel. So in today's video, we're going to be talking about why you feel fear during meditation. And this, for some of you, you might be listening to this and thinking, what was he talking about, fear? I thought when we meditate, we're supposed to be tapping into peace and calm, but a good portion of you will probably resonate with this and realize that actually, yeah, at some stages in meditation, especially as you're getting deeper, not every time, but on certain occasions, you will feel fear. And it can throw a lot of people off because they're kind of like, why am I feeling scared? I'm doing something that is benefiting me. I'm doing something that is supposed to be peace inducing, that is supposed to be tapping me into the universal love, the divine love, whatever you want to call it. But yeah, I'm feeling fear, and I've got other maybe distractions like frustration or anger and other things like this as well can manifest. I'm going to be talking more specifically about fear today. And I'm going to go through in this video why you feel fear and how to deal with it when you do feel it, because this is something I've personally experienced as well over the years. And I think once you understand where it's coming from, why you experience it, and how to overcome it, it just takes away a lot of its kind of impact. So hopefully this video will do that for you today. Also, I wanted to remind you, and for those of you who are new here, I have a online meditation and spiritual community. It's called the Inner Journey School, and inside the community there's an amazing community of about 150 people at the moment. I host live sessions throughout the week. There is loads of courses and guidance on meditation and spirituality. So if that piques your interest, then I'll put a link down in the description. Feel free to check that out. So why do we feel fear when we're meditating? The first point that I want to make, in fact, I'm gonna give you a bit of an insight into how I experience fear, and it will probably help you to resonate a bit more. I think you'll understand what I'm talking about a bit more if I give you my experience of fear. So, the first time that I really experienced fear during meditation, I was on a 10-day meditation retreat, a silent retreat. It's one of these kind of overly extreme retreats where you're up at 4 a.m. and you don't stop meditating basically all throughout the day until about 10 p.m. And on day 7 of this retreat, I had this experience where my consciousness just exponentially expanded just in the space of about 5 seconds, and I found myself shooting through different planes of consciousness, different planes of existence, and I was out of my body, out my physical body, and I was kind of passing through these various sheaths, and I could feel my body becoming more and more refined. My consciousness was expanding more and more. Many amazing things were taking place all within this short period of time. And then I was overcome, a combination of fear and amazement. It was a bizarre mix, but there was this just general beauty and amazement of what was taking place and my experience of it, and I was amazed and I was awestruck, but at the same time I was being pulled back by fear. Fear didn't want me to keep going, and I understood where the fear was coming from at the time, and it still was hard for me to continue with the meditation at that time. And I'll obviously explain why that was and kind of how you can deal with it, during your practices. It doesn't necessarily come about just when you're having a profound experience like this as well. A lot of people feel fear just during general meditations. So why do you feel fear? Well, I like to bring it back and say, what part of you is feeling fear? What part of you is it that feels the fear? Because it's coming from somewhere. It's coming from some aspect of you. And I'm going to give you the answer. The fear comes from I. So I also equals ego. Now, ego could also be described as your identity. So ego also can equal identity. And when we meditate, it's important to kind of understand and remind yourself of why we meditate and what's actually taking place when we meditate. So when we meditate, we're actually letting go of what I call body consciousness. So I'll put it over here. Spelled that wrong. There we go. Body consciousness. So we're letting go of the body consciousness, the sense of physicality, and that's obviously also linked with the five senses, right? So body consciousness is very much linked with five senses. And the ego is attached to these. So we have to, when we're letting go of physicality in meditation, so when we're starting to go deeper, when you're immersed, let's say, on the breath, and you're starting to go deeper in the meditation, what you're actually doing is you're letting go of all of the sensual activity. So the senses which are ordinarily in daily life, outward projecting, we contract them, we retract them. And when all of the senses are under wraps to some degree, they're under your management, this is when you'll start to feel a deepening in the meditation. And this all happens quite naturally often. We put ourselves in a meditation position, we prepare ourselves correctly, we do everything we can, but this actual process of meditation takes place fairly naturally. So the eye will work through the senses in order to stop you moving forward. So there are many other distractions outside of just fear that the ego will work through to try and stop you from moving forward. And you've got to ask yourself again, it's good to kind of go backwards with this. Why does the ego work through the senses and try and stop you going deeper in meditation? Why does the ego bring about fear? If that wasn't clear already, that's where the fear comes from. It comes from the ego. The ego will place many hurdles and barriers and restrictions in your path because the ego does not want you to be doing meditation. The reason for this is that when you start going beyond body consciousness, when you start going beyond the limitation of the five senses, you start to access higher levels of consciousness. You start to access higher levels of consciousness. And what does that mean? That means that you're starting to realize who you are. So this process of self-realization, it's always taking place, but when we go in deeper in meditation, as your consciousness starts to expand, you might have moments where you experience yourself outside of the limitations of the five senses. So you're actually, and when I say that, you're experiencing yourself outside the limitations of the five senses. Therefore, you're starting to get closer to self-realization or God realization because you're gradually now realizing, okay, I'm not the limitations of this body. Oh, okay, I'm not confined just to the five senses. The ego is much more intelligent than most of us probably understand. The ego knows this because the ego knows us intimately. The ego is something that we've had from our very first physical incarnation. And as we as human beings have evolved, the ego has also evolved and it's become more knowing of our flaws. It's become the dominating feature for most people. So the ego is now in control of the higher self, or not the higher self, but the ego is in control of us, and we're living through the ego, and we're not really aware or connected to our higher consciousness, our higher self. So when we go through the process of meditation, we start peeling away the layers, we start going beyond the boundaries of the five senses, start experiencing higher levels of consciousness. We're getting closer and closer, gradually, step by step, to self-realization or God realization. The ego knows this. And upon God realization taking place, the ego is no longer needed. Once one attains God realization, you become one with everything. You experience your consciousness as being one with everything, and therefore you're no longer bound by the limitations of the ego. Well, the ego knows all of this, and so the ego will place many barriers in your path, many forms of resistance, restrictions, hurdles, different things that you have to overcome and work through to try to stop you from doing it. And this might sound ridiculous if you're watching this. You might think, how? It doesn't make sense. Why would the ego do that? That is how intelligent the ego is. It will place many things in your path to stop you from doing it. Fear is a very big and helpful friend of the ego, because many times we associate fear as being something we need to run away from. We see fear, we recognize fear, and we turn away from it because naturally it's an uncomfortable feeling that we don't want to immerse ourselves in. So the ego, again, knows this, and it will present fear when our consciousness is starting to expand, and the ego is thinking, oh man, I need to put something in his way because he's starting to understand who he is, and when he understands who he is, I am no longer needed. Therefore, here's a load of fear for you to deal with. Here's a load of resistance for you to deal with. Oh, let me work through the 5 senses. Let me make your mouth salivate like a tap. That's something that I've experienced as well. Many of you have probably experienced this. So the ego will use fear basically as a hurdle, as a barrier to stop you from progressing. So ego uses fear. So knowing that can be very relieving for many people. And I know when I first was taught this and understood this, it felt like a weight was lifted off my shoulders, because I finally realized that, okay, when I feel fear, when I feel scared in a meditation, that is a red cross. So that is like a red cross that marks treasure. This is a pink cross, but we're going to pretend it's a red cross. So that is fear, right? And fear is a big cross that marks treasure. And I would really, really encourage you to start changing your mindset around fear. And when you start feeling fear in meditation, when you start feeling other kinds of resistance in meditation, I want you to really understand and know that this is coming from a part of you that is now trying to stop you from moving forward. And when you can go in with that knowing, when you can feel the simmerings of fear when you're getting deeper in meditation, and you can remind yourself, this is the part of me that doesn't want me to progress. That means that I need to move towards it because I'm actually getting somewhere right now. I'm actually making progress. So fear is a red cross that marks treasure, or a pink cross in this case, and we need to move gently towards the fear. Now, obviously, we all have different degrees of fear depending on whatever the thing is that we are fearful of. But if you are just feeling the simmerings of fear, we can move towards the fear. We don't need to run away from it. We can just gradually feel the fear, observe the fear, but not become fearful. Don't allow our nature to be changed. We can still notice and observe the fear without being scared, if that makes sense. So essentially, the understanding of it itself will help you to overcome this particular egoic response to getting deeper in meditation. And ultimately, you don't really need to do much else. It's not something that I'm going to write this huge checklist of, you need to do this, now you need to do this, now you need to do this. When it comes to fear, you need to keep things simple, and any kind of resistance. And the more attention you give it, the more you engage these different forms of resistance that you feel in meditation, the more they normally expand. So another form of resistance that I'm actually probably going to do a whole video on is your mouth salivating. Something that I've really experienced over the years. And if you focus on it, if you have this occur during your meditation, your mouth starts really salivating, and you start focusing on it, you start becoming aware of it, it gets worse. It starts, it becomes more and more and more of a problem. And you find, I've had it before where I've literally been meditating, leaning over, it sounds awful, but having streams of saliva coming out of my mouth, and it's all coming from the ego. And I knew that, and so I just persisted, and just carried on through it, eventually got over it. But if you focus on it, it becomes more of a problem. If you just let it go, just keep coming back to the focal point of the meditation, you'll move beyond it. If you can't do that, we go back to what I just mentioned about observing the fear. You observe the fear, you feel the fear, you don't become the fear, you don't become and act in accordance to fear, but you feel the fear, you observe the fear, and then you will eventually overcome the fear. The power of the fear will subside and you'll be able to move beyond it. So I hope this is helpful. I know it's kind of a tricky subject to articulate at times, but I hope I've done a good enough of a job that it makes sense to you. Please let me know if this is helpful, because there's a lot more that I could go into with regards to different forms of resistance and how to work and overcome the ego. So please let me know if this was helpful. Let me know in the comments if you've had any experience of this, and yeah, how you managed it. I'd love to hear. Do have a look at my Inner Journey School if that's of interest, and I look forward to seeing you on the next video.